Hi folks, I'm Dr. Andrew Chappell and I'm going to talk today about energy requirements and macronutrient requirements for lots of different sports, but mainly I'm going to focus on bodybuilding and physique sports because that's what I largely work on. This is my company here, ProPrepCoaching, so if this presentation interests you, then please do get in touch for more content like this. But also, if you are interested in getting yourself ready for a competition, you think we can help you, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. So just a little bit about who I am before we get into this, and of course, welcome to my my webinar. So I am an academic. I spent 10 years in university actually, and I worked at universities for a long time as well. And you can see this is my CV here. So I'm a Doctor of Nutrition. I also have an MSc in Nutrition and Metabolism, and I have a Sport and Exercise Science degree. I've got over 20 different published research pieces, but my main speciality is in physique sports, bodybuilding primarily, and what athletes do to get themselves in shape, and what are the physiological and the psychological consequences of that. I'm interested in supplements as well as the omega-3 fatty acids. And when I worked at the Rowe Institute of Nutrition and Health, I was involved in studying and researching the colonic gut microbiota. So I used to do lots of experiments in the lab with that. I've worked at Aberdeen University, I've worked at Robert Gordon University, and I've also worked at Sheffield Hallam University teaching as well. So that's just a little bit about my academic background as well. In terms of sporting background, my big sports that I've focused on down the years, I've participated in myself, are bodybuilding, primarily the sport of natural bodybuilding. So I've been fortunate enough to be a 6-time British natural bodybuilding champion. I've been a finalist in the top 3, 9 separate times. So very proud of that. I've won Mr. Scotland 7 times. I've got 2 natural bodybuilding pro cards. So the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation is the biggest bodybuilding organisation in the world, and I have a pro card for those guys. I've competed in 6 pro shows. I've also competed in 7 world finals, including the NABA Universe. Aside from that, I've also competed in strongman. So I did that for a number of years as well. So I've done over 7 under 90 kilogram strongman contests. I've also dabbled in powerlifting as well. And I've been a bodybuilding judge in over 50 shows, including world championships. And I'm the president of the WMBF United Kingdom. We take athletes over to take part in the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation's finals and throughout Europe. I'm also the head coach and head of training and development for ProPrepCoaching as well. So that's just a little bit about me before we get started. In terms of what we do at ProPrepCoaching, where I do most of my work, we largely get people ready for bodybuilding events. So people who want to transform their physiques and get on stage. That's a lot of what we do here. And this is me and my partner, Stephanie Noble, great natural bodybuilder herself and pro herself at the NABA Universe back in 2019. And what I'll say is a lot of the methods that I've investigated, researched from my own scientific endeavours, these are the same things that we utilise every single day at ProPrepCoaching. So as well as keeping people accountable, we utilise evidence-based techniques to get people in shape, and having that scientific background, I think our clients really appreciate that approach that we take. The thoroughness and the attention to detail really does make a difference. Here's our latest publication. You can go and have a look at this as well. That was published last year with another couple of heavyweights from the world of natural bodybuilding. Here's some of our athletes. So these are athletes who competed in 2021. In total, I believe we had 32 athletes competing in, believe it or not, 63 shows. 7 took part in the world finals. That's these people down here. Here's a whole host of other athletes taking part as well. And we had 24, in fact, I think it was maybe in 26 first places from those athletes, as well as another 20 or so seconds, and another 15 to 20 third places as well. So the teams did very, very well. And as I say, the same strategies that I'm going to talk about today are the type of strategies that we utilise for athletes getting ready for competitions. If you're thinking to yourself at this moment in time that you perhaps lack the knowledge to help you get ready for what it is you're trying to do, whether it's a bodybuilding transformation or whether or not it's just a general lifestyle move, and you think we can help you get results, then like I said, please do get in touch if you want somebody to help you keep accountable. And if you want that scientific approach to training and nutrition, then we'd love to work with you. Okay, so that's the start, guys. And now we're going to go on to the main body of the seminar here. So by the end of this webinar, the goal really is that you understand how calorific methods work for assessing your energy requirements. So you work out how is it that we can actually estimate energy requirements. I'm going to talk about the main fuel sources associated with exercise. I'm going to talk about how you can calculate energy requirements, and then I'm going to talk about the limitations of them. So it's important that we understand these different aspects, because once you understand those things, then it definitely helps us in terms of understanding why it's important for coaching, but also why it's important for yourself as an athlete, and also so that you can sort of rationalize things much, much better. People get less stressed when they understand what's going on. So that's what we're going to talk about in this particular webinar. And the macronutrients, the energy requirements, it all comes in and it's factored in to this particular webinar with this information. Okay, so it's important for coaching for a number of different reasons, okay? And one of the first things that when working with a coach or working with athletes who are trying to get in shape that we try to do is we try to think about, okay, well, what are the energy demands of the individual? How much do they need to work out and to achieve their goals, essentially? Now, things that they'll do, nutritionists, people at ProPrepCoaching like myself, coaches, is we'll try and work out what your current intake was or your past intakes. We're trying to identify what your energy levels are. We're also trying to work out what your requirements are based on your daily activity. So these are things that we're always trying to work out. However, it's a constant flux. So if you're working more on one day, exercising on another day, if you go and you're not feeling particularly well, then your energy requirements will go up and down depending on those particular factors as well. Also, your goals matter. So if you're trying to gain weight or lose weight, then it's fairly obvious we want less energy or we want more energy as well. Now, you could just take a sort of sledgehammer approach and just give someone 1,000 calories and we can be pretty sure that they'll be eating significantly less, but and they probably lose weight. However, that sort of approach is not sustainable and it's definitely not evidence-based. So it's important that we can calculate these things accurately for the long-term success of the individual that we're potentially working with and for your success as well. Okay, so this is the question, and I should mention that all these slides, these pictures you see, these are our athletes at ProPrepCoaching appearing on them. Okay, so how much energy? Well, the success of working that out will determine what our energy requirements are and our macros are. That will help us determine what our food choices are, maybe the meal timings that we take. It'll also help us sort of factor in what the practical issues could be around eating certain things at different times of days. Now, there's different ways you can calculate energy requirements. Now, if you had a lab, you do something called indirect or direct calorimetry. Okay, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit. The other thing you do, if you don't have a lab, is you use prediction equations, and that's very often what we're using out here in the real world from there. Activity diaries, accelerometers, step counters, things like that, like I've got my watch here. These are all useful as well to help us calculate energy requirements. Of course, the other thing to say is, when we're looking at things like macronutrient splits, is we're really talking about energy systems that our body's going to utilize. So, for example, if someone's largely taking part in anaerobic type activity, so a lot of weightlifting, maybe doing body pump style classes, maybe some CrossFit, then most of the energy that we're going to be utilizing is this energy system here, which is anaerobic glycolysis. If you're more a sort of powerlifting type activity, you're doing a lot of 1 rep maxes, then you're really utilizing your ATP phosphate energy systems. And then if you're more into sort of aerobic type activities, then you utilize a real whole host of these energy systems. So you'll utilize carbohydrates through glycolysis, and then fatty acids through beta fatty acid oxidation to generate your ATP, which is the main energy currency that our body utilizes for doing movement at the end of the day. Now, with that in mind, a number you'll already be thinking, right, okay, well, if I'm doing mainly anaerobic activity, then I need more of this type of fuel source, e.g. carbohydrate. If I'm doing more aerobic activity, then I need more of a blend of fuel sources. And then if I'm doing more sort of single 1 rep max stuff, then maybe I only need ATP, and I don't have to worry about all this stuff quite as much. And that's quite a good deduction moving forward from here, and that'll become more apparent as we go on. So different sports have got different requirements, and you can put them into different categories. So we've got anaerobic, aerobic sort of style sports, bodybuilding type sports, physique sports, and again, these are our athletes. These athletes are really using that anaerobic glycolysis, so it's a lot of carbohydrate requirements from that type of sports. Swimming, it really does depend on the discipline and the distance, but short distance anaerobic glycolysis, a lot of carbohydrate utilization. Really long distance stuff, more fatty acids from here. Stop-start sports, so tennis, soccer. You can see here that you'll have periods of times whereby you're sprinting across a court, but these games can go on for quite a long time. You'll jog quite a lot as well. Some Premier League footballers will do 10k in a match, so they need to have that combination of fuel sources from here. Sprinting, largely dependent on anaerobic glycolysis, particularly the training, and strongman, certain activities, it's just going to be largely creatine phosphates, ATP that we're utilizing. Certainly there's probably not going to be as much of a requirement for large amounts of fatty acids, because we're not doing activity that really lasts much longer than 2 minutes in duration. So different sports, different requirements, different macronutrient splits depending on them. Okay, so first concept we're going to really talk about here is this idea of basal metabolic rate, okay? So when it comes to calculating how many calories your body needs, we're really talking about calculating how many calories your body needs to meet this idea of something called basal metabolic rate. Now, basal metabolic rate is basically the amount of calories your body needs just to maintain itself. And we use this concept or this word called homeostasis. So that's where everything is absolutely fine. We're not breaking things down or building them up. We've not got any diseases in it. We're perfectly healthy as an individual. So we won't gain body weight. We'll not lose body weight from here. And in this example, you can see here for basal metabolic rate to be tested, then we need to sort of make sure that we are lying supine. We've gone 12 hours without consuming anything. The environment's nice and thermal neutral, so it's not too hot, not too cold as well. And we're looking at sort of really measuring it under these conditions. So you can see, for example, this chap here, he's got an eye mask on, and in this method here, this is something called indirect calorimetry that he's using here, so breath by breath analysis. If we can't satisfy these sort of conditions, so 12 hours postprandial, minimal amounts of activity, then we use an R term called resting metabolic rate from here. So energy requirements are based on satisfying just basic needs of the human body. We're not including physical activity on top of it from here. So that's what basal metabolic rate is. Now, there's lots of factors which will influence basal metabolic rate. So body size, for example, a bigger person requires more calories than a smaller person. The amount of muscle mass you've got, so we often talk about this idea of fat-free mass. But the other things which will influence energy requirements are physical activity, and then there's this other concept of thermogenesis. So this is when we consume food, that causes us to burn some calories because we're not 100% efficient on that. Psychological, so if people have got certain conditions, diseases, our energy requirements go up because of that. If you're cold, then you shiver, so your energy requirements go up. Drug-induced thermogenesis, so there are certain drugs which cause us to burn more calories as well. And then there's this concept of NEAT, so this is non-exercise associated thermogenesis. Now you'll notice a lot I talk with my hands. This is what we would describe as NEAT. This fidgeting is all activity. Interestingly, most of the energy requirements for your body actually comes from your organs. So you can see here, you've got your brain, large contribution required for your energy requirements, heart, liver, digestive system, all 19%, 16%, 8%, 7%, 17%. Your actual muscle mass makes up 20%, but you can see in terms of the proportion of the body, the most energy requiring area is actually cognition and your organs. So if you want to actually increase your basal metabolic rate, then more organs would help you, but that's not obviously a viable explanation. Fat mass, very small contribution towards energy requirements. If you increase your muscle mass, then your energy requirements will obviously increase. And a classic sort of thing that PTs talk about is, let's build more muscle tissue, and then that way we'll be able to consume more calories and help ourselves get in shape a little bit better while we're at rest. Okay, so in terms of actually measuring it, we can use a method here called direct calorimetry. And you have to use these chambers here. And already you're probably thinking to yourself that, Andrew, this is in no way viable or useful at all for us to actually use in the real world. And you'd be right, but let's talk about this anyway. So the human body, it's a combustion engine essentially. It gives off body heat, and you will exhale carbon dioxide and you intake O2. And now based on the O2, that you breathe in, the CO2 that you put out, and the amount of heat in the room, then we can work out what the energy requirements are for an individual, purely based on those concepts alone. In terms of indirect calorimetry, which is much more accessible to people because these large metabolic chambers are very hard to get a hold of, then you're using a method like this. And this is whereby you're measuring just direct CO2 and O2 inhalation and exhalation from there. And through those methods, you can work out what the energy requirements are of an individual just based on those particular methods. So we've got direct calorimetry, and then we've got indirect calorimetry, and that's the method which people are more likely to encounter if you're ever to go into a lab. Now, the great thing about O2 and CO2 consumption is depending on if you're consuming more O2 or less CO2, you can get something called a respiratory coefficient, and it allows us to calculate what somebody's fat oxidation is or their carbohydrate oxidation is based on the amount that's being consumed. Now, an RQ of 1 largely means that there is more O2 being consumed, whereas a RQ of 0.7, and that's the lowest, means that there's more fatty acid being consumed. And then from this, you can calculate while someone's exercising if they're utilizing more fatty acid or if they're utilizing more carbohydrate. And this is where this concept of fat burning zones really comes in, because we can relate it to proportions of heart rates, and we can also do interesting experiments like, do you burn more fatty acid when you're fasted or if you're non-fasted? And the answer to that is it doesn't really actually matter. You don't burn any more at all. But this is where this concept comes from here. So we can relate it to a VO2 max, we can relate it to a heart rate from here. So very useful method, this. Now, the intensity of exercise is important, because at low intensities, so while I'm sitting here at rest or I'm doing sort of low steady state cardio, the sort of fuel source that we largely utilize is going to be fatty acid. So fatty acid at low exercise intensities is very, very high. It's around about 50 to 70%. And then as the exercise intensity increases, the contribution of carbohydrate consumption, so muscle glycogen utilization, also increases. So fatty acid oxidation goes down, carbohydrate utilization goes up. And that's why people often talk about doing very low intensity cardio to try and burn as much fatty acid as they possibly can. Again, this also comes back to concepts like 1 rep max. So the higher percentage of your 1 rep max you work at, the more contribution of carbohydrate you're going to be utilizing compared to if you're doing lots of aerobics where you might be burning more fatty acid. The other thing which is an interesting concept is the longer you exercise for, the more you start to utilize fatty acid as your main energy store. Now, that's tied into exercise intensity as well, because you can't exercise for a very long duration at a very high intensity because you just get tired, you get burned out. So low intensity, long duration exercise, the longer you actually do it, the more fatty acid that you actually burn. So a very important and an interesting concept to consider as well. And you can stop the slide and you can read any of these notes if you want. Another concept which is important to understand as well is that as you get fitter, your body gets better and better at using fatty acid as its main energy source. So your body's consistently working towards trying to spare as much muscle glycogen as it possibly can. So in the untrained individual, what you see is that at high exercise intensities, they use a lot of glycogen. However, in the trained individual, glycogen utilization is much, much lower. So as you get fitter, you're able to work at higher exercise intensities and you're able to burn more fatty acids. So that has consequences for whether or not you want to increase your exercise intensity as you get fitter during things like contest preps as well. Things happen, you get more intramuscular triglycerides, so those are fatty acids. You get more muscle capillaries in so the ability to deliver oxygen to the muscles. You get more mitochondria. These are the powerhouses of the cells, which are very good at utilizing fatty acids. You also get more of this hormone-sensitive lipase, which allows you to utilize more fatty acid while you're exercising as well. So, very important concept. So this is a nice little summary of all the different things that I've really just been talking about here. And both the graphs more or less represent the same thing. But what you can see here is that at high intensity exercise, what you're really utilizing is carbohydrate mostly. Protein's got a very small contribution towards energy requirements while we're exercising and even at rest. And it's only at the lower exercise intensities, represented by these yellow bars here, that you're utilizing much more fatty acid as well. And that's why recommendations for athletes taking part in exercise are upwards of 60% of the athlete's requirements should come from carbohydrate, or as high as 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So important factors to consider. This here, again, this is a very similar concept. So here we've got exercise intensity again. So carbohydrate utilization going up, whereas fat utilization going down as the exercise intensity increases. So again, similar sort of concept as the slides before. And again, this is just expressed in a slightly different way. So when we're doing weight lifting type exercise, particularly bodybuilding type stuff, we're using much more anaerobic glycolysis. Things like body pump, for example, where you're doing kind of more aerobics with the weights, sometimes CrossFit, you're starting to utilize much more fatty acids on the trend line here. And then something like triathlete, incidentally, this is my sister, she's using a lot more fatty acids than certainly I would be doing at this intensity up here. Again, similar concept, just the graph is flipped around the other way, and it's exercise duration, so fatty acids utilized much more so than when you're doing sort of shorter term exercise, whereby creatine phosphates are your main energy store. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a summary here. So indirect and direct calorimetry, these can be utilized to determine your energy requirements. Exercise intensity, duration and fitness of the individual will determine your fuel utilization, and obviously the type of exercise as well. So your macro split depends on the sport that you're doing, and carbohydrates and fats are going to go up and down depending on your requirements from there. So there's no real such thing as the optimal macro split. It really just does depend on circumstance. Then of course what the goal is: weight gain, weight loss, where you potentially are in the season. Is it a race? Is it a competition? Are you in season? Are you off season? Are you injured? So all these things really matter. And if you want to know about protein, I've also done a webinar on that as well, and you can go and check that out and get the download on that. Okay, so the thing is, we don't have access to this stuff. So how do we do this in the real world? Well, you can use prediction equations. This is the thing, and there's tons of these. There's tons of prediction equations. You've got things like Schofield, which the World Health Organization used. You've got Myth and Ceinture. You've got the Harris-Benedict, which was created way back in 1918 at the end of the First World War. You've got the Catch equations and the Cunningham equations as well. And this can calculate your basal metabolic rate, and then from there you can work out what your energy requirements are. And to work these your energy requirements out, very often you just need to know the individual's height, their weight, their age, and sometimes what their body fat percentages are to work out what their fat-free mass is. So here's an example of this right here. We've got the Harris-Benedict equation, the Schofield. Here's another one, the Liu. They've got the Yang. There's Singapore. And like I said, there's loads of these equations, and you get, roughly speaking, this is how it works. So these are cofactors. So it'd be 66 plus 13.7, punch in your weight, plus 5 multiplied by your height, minus 6.8 times your years. And that'll give you a calorie requirement per day, and you can have a look at the other ones as well. Here's an example of this. So here's the show field. So I've done this. A male, 33, 95 kilograms, moderately active, I would say. So if I use this key here, we take this line here, I go 11.5 multiplied by my own weight plus 87.873, and then you can see here then my requirements are 1966. So that's how many calories I require per day. And then this is a standard error. So this is plus or minus. So roughly around about there it says plus or minus. After that, I can then work out what my energy requirements are for physical activity based on a multiplication factor. So we can see my requirements. I've said I'm moderately active, so I'm going to take my number here that I've got, multiply it by 1.7, and then that's going to suggest around about 3,342 calories is what I'd need just to maintain my body size based on my current activity levels. Now, if I was to exercise and I want to lose weight, then I need to make a deficit there. If I want to gain weight, then I have to have additional calories on top of that. Here's the Cunningham example. So for the Cunningham, you need to know what your body fat is. So I'm going to add, again, a multiplication factor in here. So we're going to take a body fat measurement and say that I am 20%. This is how it works here. So you take your RMR 22 multiplied by your lean body mass plus 500. So I've done the equation here already. And then that gives me 2,172 calories. Again, we multiply it by the activity factor, and then that gives us a requirement or a recommendation of 3,692. So quite significantly different from the previous number on there. And I'm going to come on and I'm going to talk a little bit more about these as well. Okay, so activity is obviously a big thing that we want to try and consider. Can we actually calculate it accurately? And what you could do is you could track it over the course of the day. You can use things, an idea called METs. So that's how something like a watch will calculate the amount of calorie burn that you'll get from doing some things like cardio, for example. You can use heart rate monitors, accelerometers to track steps, and you can compare them against guidelines. So the World Health Organization has got guidelines on these things that you can compare your metabolic equivalents to work out if you're doing moderate activity or vigorous activity as well. So we can do that. Here's an idea of what 3 to 6 METs looks like, and here's an idea of what greater than 6 METs look like. And again, you can pause this and you can go and have a little look at this. But again, this is how your calories burned are worked out on something like an activity watch from here. Other things you can do is you can get these tables, and again, this is how your a lot of exercise equipment machines will work. This is how a lot of apps will work, is that they'll use these tables. They'll be able to get metabolic equivalents for different activities, and then they can multiply the energy demands based on this. Okay, so that's a little bit about METs. Now, it all seems very neat and easy. And this is why I've put this example up here of paint by numbers. So paint by numbers is a concept of whereby you get a painting and then you colour it in based on what it says. Put this colour in this area, this colour in that area, and you get a beautiful little picture at the end. However, it's never as simple as that in the real world. So the common things that people encounter when they're trying to use prediction equations and to work out what their energy requirements are, is that sometimes athletes don't have enough energy to complete sessions even though you've worked out their calorie requirements. Sometimes they start losing weight or they start gaining weight. Sometimes they just get bloated from eating all the food because they're not used to it. And here's the thing, you've got to remember that your athletes are individual and you have to work out what works best for them. So although you've got a number out of textbook, doesn't mean to say that actual number is accurate. And this is the real kicker that I want you to all sort of take home with this, in terms of which equation is best to use and how good this stuff is. I've published on this a number of times. So here's a couple of papers. I've got another one that I've published on this. This is from boxers who are getting ready to go away to the Gold Coast and for the Commonwealth Games. And this is one from strongmen athletes who are taking part in UK's Strongest Man, where I've measured them breath by breath analysis and then I've compared their calories to prediction equations. So just bear that in mind. I've also done this on bodybuilders as well, and what we see is that in the boxers, you're looking at over and underestimations of their basal metabolic rates by over 700 calories, and the strongmen 800 to 1,000 calories. So that's 53 to 64%. And the long and short of it is that these prediction equations, they're not very good. They're just not very good. And that is where you really need the help of a coach, a nutritionist, someone who's experienced and understands these things to be able to work with you to actually work out what is the best intake for yourself. Here's another published paper on this as well. This is claiming that prediction equations off by around about 284 calories, and that can be a lot. There's certainly a lot when we're thinking about trying to lose weight or gain weight. Okay, so why is this important? Well, we want to always maximize performance. And the best way that we can really work out what someone's energy requirements are is to take a series of longitudinal measurements, so measurements over time. And that's why it's really important that we're always having up-to-date things like body weight. We're measuring things like circumferences, so what's happening with our waist, what's happening with our biceps, that we're always getting high-quality photographs to see how people are changing, and that we're always being consistent with the amount of training, eating, the amount of activity that we're doing. Because when we start to reach inconsistencies, it can start to become impossible for the coach, the nutritionist, for anyone to actually know what the athlete's actual energy requirements are if they're always doing something different every single day, and there's not a clear picture of what is actually affecting their body weight. So it's important. So energy requirements, it's not a paint by numbers game, and certainly macronutrient requirements are the same. They're not paint by numbers as well. There needs to be a needs analysis on what you're doing. Requirements differ depending on training schedules. They differ depending on your body fat levels, your muscle mass, occupation levels. It's important to consistently check things like body weight, training, girths, photographs, and things like that. And unless the athlete's following the plan or you're following the plan, it becomes very, very difficult to know what works and how to make efficient and sustainable changes to a plan, if that makes sense. Okay guys, here's a whole bunch of references you might find useful related to this presentation here. And like I said earlier on, if you found this information useful and you think that we can potentially help you get in shape for competitions, body transformations, then we'd love to hear from you at ProPrepCoaching. Go check out our website. It's www.ProPrepCoaching.com. You can find me on Instagram. I'm Fueled by Scott's Oats. Check out the WNBF UK. Also check out ProPrepCoaching. And then check out the WNBF UK as well at the same time if you're interested in natural bodybuilding and excelling your body in that respect as well. I'm Dr. Andrew Chappell, and thank you very much for your attention. Thanks, guys.